All right, everyone turn on your sides. Oh, all right. Yeah, just the first slide. All right. If you do turn to your sides, you will see that my company's name is Birdi. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Belinsky, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Birdi. I am a lifelong New Yorker, so it's good to be back in New York City. New York City is in the very lifeblood of our product. We're making a smart smoke alarm that also tracks indoor air pollution. Now, the creation story happened during Hurricane Sandy. So my grandmother lived right in the evacuation zone. And we're Russian. And so when the government tells you to leave the house, what was the response? She stayed put. Reason why is Russians fell for that too many times. So she stayed put and unfortunately was right in the disaster zone as well. So thankfully, she was okay. But when I finally went to go visit her, I noticed that she and everyone else in their homes were heating with their gas stoves, potentially poisoning themselves. And I thought, is there a better solution? Is there something that could call her on her landline and explain to her in Russian why that's dangerous, but that would also send me a push notification to say, oh my God, grandma's in trouble? And looked at the market, and nothing like that existed. And I thought, well, let's keep digging. Okay, smoke alarms, everybody hates them. Largely, they don't even work with the very premise of what they're supposed to do, which is to save our lives. The reason why? Has anybody heard that beep, beep, beep at 2 o'clock in the morning? The result. Who has a smoke alarm that looks like this? A lot of people. Or it doesn't look like that because it's actually just stuck in the closet. And so thought, well, why not reinvent this annoying, ugly device? And if so, what do we actually do about it? And so the thought process started to be, okay, well, what is this device doing? Right? It's sensing on our ceiling. But for some reason, it's only sensing a tiny bit of emergencies. So why not broaden that spectrum and start looking at a lot more emergency, but also start looking at this as not some device that's either going to annoy you or only going to help you on the off chance that there's some sort of a disaster, but actually help you every single day of your life to get better and better. And so what do we do about it? We went to New York City Big Apps and went to a hackathon. And when we did this in 2013, it was sort of like bringing a gun to a knife fight. It just wasn't fair, and it wasn't actually applicable. So we came out with our soldering irons and our Arduinos, and we didn't even know if it was legally viable. Right? It was outside of the constraints of NYC Big Apps. So we had to talk to NYC EDC, pass it with the lawyers, try and figure out if we can actually push hardware into the hackathon scene, which thankfully they did allow. And we did win a prize at that hackathon. So with the $1,500, we got to buy a little bit more equipment. And I want to stress the very little bit more. But more importantly, we had validated that people are as excited about this idea as we are. So much so that we wanted to continue to cultivate that excitement. So we named the company Canary because canary in a coal mine, right? Everybody kind of knows that. What we found is only 50% of people really knew that. And then our lawyers actually approached us and said, you're not the first clever guys to figure that out. There's kind of 100 years of precedent, so you don't want to get into a trademark dispute. Let's rename the company into something that's also bird-related. And so we thought, well, why not a little birdie told me? But we wanted to create a physical model so that we could keep that traction going and actually get some press around to see if beyond the hackathon and the super early adopters, a larger proportion of people wanted to wanted to replace their old smoke alarm with something better. And so, every bird needs its bird's nest, and so we wanted the first version to look like a bird's nest, to have that visual upgrade. And it worked. We were in the Wall Street Journal, we were in Fast Company, people were really excited about this, and so that continued to validate us further. So in our bootstrapping process, it's kind of going one step after another to get to the next stage of the process. Now, the interesting thing about the hardware accelerators is they're harder to get into than the Ivy Leagues, right? Their acceptance rate is way lower. And so how do you get into them? So for us, it was really exciting because we had already taken a lot of the preliminary steps to not only prove that there was a market there, but also that the press was excited about this. So that was part of our process of continuing to move forward. And being part of the first class of Highway 1 was really exciting because we were suddenly surrounded by other hardware companies at the very early stage when most of the software people thought, this is just a crazy thing that can never possibly work. Hardware, selling things for money? I don't know what that's about. Now, what's interesting is these guys are the hardest ones to talk to because unless you're talking to them about millions of units, they just kind of laugh you out of the room. Now, having the relationship with Highway 1 started to get them really excited. So in the first days, we couldn't have conversations. By the end of the program, we were featured in the Qualcomm Smart Home in Barcelona at Mobile World Congress. So you spray a little bit of smoke at Birdi, suddenly the lights change colors to warn you. The TV sets up an alert. The sound system starts blaring that there's an emergency, and the smart door lock unlocks so that the fire department doesn't have to break down your door in order to save your life. So that was a huge step for us to get to access to the actual chips so that they can be put in the device so that we can make a retail product. Now, when we were looking at this, we really wanted to address the issue of air pollution. It's the largest quality of life indicator that we know nothing about. We do it every day. We're doing it right now, breathing. What's the air quality like? We know that it's worse indoors, but we don't have that footprint. And so we wanted to do something better. So when looking at what the competition was doing, these old smoke alarms are binary. If there's smoke, turn on. If there's not smoke, don't turn on. Doesn't take into account the height of the ceiling, the size of the room. These aren't smart technologies. And so we went to our Bible and started to analyze what was out there to first figure out the BOM, identify what do we do, what do we put in this. But then we started to notice that the competition is actually using really dumb devices. And in air quality sensing, it's curious that the products are either super high-end, using lasers and extremely expensive, or they're more toys and not actually high-quality sensors. Right? They're not going beyond the binary into actually differentiating between particles and analyzing it, quantifying it, then feeding that back to the user. And so what we started to do was to look at DigiKey as our strategic insight into what the competition is doing and figure out how do we actually do it better so that, to the point earlier, it doesn't become as easily commoditized, where others just recreate what we had already created, but instead creating something from scratch that is truly unique. The next stage is actually going to user-centered design, making sure that people need this. And with the asthma and allergy rates just skyrocketing in children, that's been a large focus of us as we continue to design the product. And so when we reimagined the smoke alarm, it wasn't just fire and carbon monoxide, it's also temperature, humidity, and particulate matter. But more importantly, it's the result of that. It's that my grandma's joints are going to get hurt because she has arthritis if the humidity rates are off. And so tracking humidity rates over time. It's understanding how we can cut off any asthma and allergy attacks in children before they actually start occurring. And so our mission is to save lives and make people healthier. And that's driving us both in our first product as well as in future products and as we continue to develop the brand, which is an important thing to do, especially when you're creating a bootstrapped hardware startup. So Eric Ries is one of our investors, and so lean hardware is a big focus of ours. So when we're thinking about how do we create a product and get data and respond, it's been actually a really interesting road for us. We partnered with the San Francisco city government as entrepreneurs in residence for the city. So we're selling products to the government in order to place them into low-income housing and start getting hands-on research and development with their epidemiologists, but also hardware sales through a new channel, which people haven't spoken of, which I think will continue to grow in the future, which is government. And we get that rich data because we have scientists working on it, we have our team working on it, and it's this intersection which is really pretty fascinating and otherwise hasn't existed, this brand new data set that we can monetize in different ways than just the hardware. So 3D printers are, of course, a cornerstone to the real-time development process, right? I think anybody who has a hardware startup has their version of a 3D printer, their favorites. Formlabs is great for us because we have to have very high precision, small parts. But I think this is the big secret for real-time hardware development now, where we can order parts and have them arrive next day. So it's this real-time development cycle where we know what we need and we're constantly ordering. And without Amazon Prime, I think it's really hard to have a hardware startup. Same thing with Postmates and courier services, right? Our base right now is in Silicon Valley. And so being able to send things up and down the valley to make sure that we have that real-time development process happening cuts off otherwise the big roadblocks that you can hit when you're developing a product. So instead of having to wait a day to ship, we can have that in hours and then speed up that process and get just much faster at iterating. And iterating in hardware, I think, is the real big challenge. And so cutting that from a day to hours is enormous. And companies like Osh Park also help in that process, and other companies such as them. And so validation was big for us to go to crowdfunding. So we chose Indiegogo, which was phenomenal. They really worked hands-on with us to build the campaign, but this was all pre-funding. So Highway 1 gave us $20,000, which almost covered rent in San Francisco. So it was still very, very much bootstrapped. So how do you create the buzz that will put you into all the different press that you kind of need to be in? For us, the hack was very much just calling people that we've been reading for the past 5 years and knowing that this is perfect for them and not perfect for New York Times or Wired, but perfect for this specific journalist, and calling them and saying, this is right up your alley. You have a kid that has allergies. You have a kid that has asthma. I know because I read an article that you posted or a blog post or I saw a tweet from 3 months ago. And so you should write about this. And then usually they're more than happy to do so. And so instead of us figuring out how do we pay for the PR, it was targeting people, calling them, and then establishing that relationship, which also means ongoing relationships, which has been really valuable. So continuing in the bootstrap process, AngelList was a big hack for us to start showing that not only on the consumer side, not only in the press side, but also on the investor side, there are a lot of people around the world that have been really interested in this company and in the problem of home security and home health. And so now we have an army of investors from around the world, and I've done different trips to different countries where we have a locally seated person who has all those press connections in that place and all the connections to the retailers in that place. So we have an incentivized army of people who are willing to work with us. So we have a sales staff in many ways. We have a sales staff in many ways that we otherwise wouldn't be able to afford, that we actually don't have to pay in capital. We've already paid them by having them on as investors. So that was a really fantastic kind of go-to-market hack in many ways for us. So where are we now? We are in the complicated process of life safety technology certification. So our product is unique in that we have to be around for 10 years. So this is about the lifespan of the Facebook, or it's older than Twitter without the E. So it's definitely a process to get us from where we are to make sure that we can be reliably on your ceiling monitoring health and safety for 10 years. Is it totally? Is that better? That is a lot better. So yeah, that's where we are now. And yeah, I would love to open the floor with any to questions and get any thoughts, comments about what we've faced so far in the bootstrapping of Birdi.
All right, so the beautiful hardware moments, the mic ran out of battery.
Yep.
Okay, this is your 70s lounge singer moment.
What was the process of partnering with the government like?
Yeah, so partnering with the government was actually really a unique opportunity for us. So we saw that they had launched an entrepreneurship in residence program, and similar to applying to the incubator. We had to apply and have several meetings with them, but it was an innovative new platform that they were trying. So, from the start, we were very conscious of the opportunity of leveraging government, right? NYC Big Apps was the reason why we existed. So we had our ears to the ground about what government innovations were happening there, saw this program, applied, and started to meet with the Department of Public Health. Very much conscious of how to communicate with government, which is very different than how to communicate with technology people. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to say, hey, the air quality in San Francisco is terrible. Instead, we're focused on behavior change and understanding how can we drive people to better health at a time when they're redeveloping San Francisco, building all sorts of high rises. Obviously, it's going to have a health impact, and it's going to drive the costs up for the city if they suddenly have to pay for the health care of so many more people. So it's understanding how to communicate with them, and they really responded to that quite well. And we think that that's a good initial pilot where the EPA suddenly has one sensor in every city, but they don't have a city blanketed. So imagine what the data set could do for redefining health and understanding why are asthma rates going up? Why are allergy rates going up? And so it's also understanding the procurement thresholds. So usually you have to go through a pretty intensive bidding process if you're going to actually sell to government, but they have thresholds. So for San Francisco, it was $10,000. Anything below that, they can kind of make that purchase if they have people inside that want to make that purchase. Anything above, you have to go through and actually bid. Other companies have to be able to bid and otherwise. So procurement thresholds are really important when thinking about government.
Thank you.
All right. One last question.
Great speech. Thanks a lot. And very interesting insights. What kind of differences have you seen in the hardware community between San Francisco and New York?
Sure. So I think the hardware community in San Francisco similarly hasn't really existed. The hardware community exists in Silicon Valley, and that doesn't reach up to San Francisco proper. I think a lot of the people want to start moving to cities, which primes New York and San Francisco particularly well to grab that talent as there's an exodus from the suburbs. So that's what we've been seeing, that people are ambitious and want to start a new thing, and so they're looking for places to go. I think there's more of a history given the proximity to manufacturing and the proximity to the silicon chips themselves. So we found it to be really accessible to just pop down and visit a lot of the partners who are making the silicon parts and make sure that that relationship continues to go in a really positive way. They want to know where we are at every given moment because it's so different than anything that they've experienced in the past 40 years.
All right, terrific. That's all we have.
Yeah. Thank you.